Hey, this is Pastor Jay Lee, and you're listening to the Daily Sabbath podcast. All right, welcome to another questions episode of the Daily Sabbath podcast. And I'm excited. We have another good one here for you today. Today, we're talking about dating and relationships. This is a question that was submitted to us by a follower on Instagram. And really, this is a question that people are always interested in. I was a pastor for 13 plus years, and I know that talking about dating and relationships was always a hot topic. And so I interviewed a special guest, Pastor Elliot Chung from One Life City Church. And we had a very wide ranging discussion about dating and relationships. And so I'm excited to share it with you here. And so here is my interview with Pastor Elliot Chung. All right. So today we are talking about everyone's favorite topic, dating and relationships. For those of you guys who are listening, maybe who are singles, or maybe you're in a dating relationship. Maybe you're past that and you're married already, but eventually you're going to probably have kids who are going to be in the dating phase of their lives. And so I think this topic is relevant for everybody. And so today I wanted to get more of a pastoral perspective on dating and relationships. And so my guest today is Pastor Elliot Chung. He's the senior pastor of One Life City Church. It's a multi-ethnic church in Orange County, California. He's also been married for 12 years to his wife, Rayanne, and they have 3 young children at home. And not only that, but also an interesting fact, Elliot has the unfortunate task of being my pastor. So Elliot is one of the pastors at the church that I attend. And so, Elliot,
It's an
thank you
honor,
so much
man.
for thank you so much for taking time to join us on the podcast today.
Oh yeah, it's a real pleasure. I honestly like not only honored to be your pastor, but just honored to be invited and asked to be on this podcast. And can I throw a little like another kind of fun fact? Um,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, like Jay and I, we actually church planted about 5 years ago together, and Lord had His plans and we had ours, and we are in the situations that we are in now. But it's such a blessing and an honor to be in this phase in our lives and still be friends and brothers and yeah. So
Yeah, for
it's an
sure.
honor, man.
No, the honor is mine. But yeah, that's true. Like I feel like there's a lot of you hear a lot of stories of people who are friends and then they do ministry together and then they're not friends anymore
Yeah.
after that, unfortunately. Which is not really funny. I probably should not be
No,
laughing
no,
about
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, thankful to say that we're still brothers and friends, and I can hit you up to be on my podcast. But yeah, so Elliot, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast and lending just a little bit of a pastoral perspective on the question.
Yeah,
So
right on.
the question that we're talking about today is dating. And so this was a question that one of our followers on Instagram submitted. But the question was literally, this is exactly what the question was: dating? Question mark. So it was left very wide open for us. And so just to kind of
Great.
give us a just to kind of give us a place to start. Um, you and I, when we were in the dating scene, 13, 14 years
Oh
ago,
my Lord. Uh-huh.
um, it was sort of in the middle of the what I would call the I Kiss Dating Goodbye era, where that book by Joshua Harris, and so kind
Yeah.
of like the whole like purity movement and things like that. And so I think in that time there was sort of this question of whether dating is even biblical, right? That
Hmm.
this idea that dating is unbiblical, that there are more biblical forms of courtship and romance and things like that, right? And so I guess just to kind of start off our conversation, I wanted to ask you like how much do you think the Bible really has to say about dating at all?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, we are that was definitely our era. We're totally like dating ourselves. Yeah, the I Kiss Dating Goodbye era, and I remember like when my youth pastor gave me that book, and because I was starting to date someone in our youth group, and I didn't buy into like what he was selling, but I did buy into the idea of that the Bible doesn't have much to say about dating. And like I naively believed that, and I taught that too. Um, but I think that was because like we are so concerned about like the mechanics of dating that we lost like the real heart and soul issue behind dating, which is like a longing for deep and intimate relationships and like sexuality. Like the Bible has tons of stuff to say about both. And so now I would recant and I would say that when I consider the well-being of our souls and our hearts and holistically spiritually, like I would actually say that the Bible has a lot to say about dating. And like you
Mm.
mentioned, like I kissed dating goodbye it really came out of that whole purity culture stuff, and it was like a reaction to like the culture, like that, and that came out of the purity culture came out of like the whole like sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s, and ever since then, like the church was always playing catch up to culture and thinking about how the church could respond to sexuality, and I think as a part of that, the church's response was, hey, when it comes to sex, we're gonna stay away from it.
Mm.
And historically, we haven't been clear about what God and what the Bible teaches about sex. And so, it's like the whole like it became like the whole pink elephant thing. Don't think about the pink elephant. Don't think about the pink elephant. And we did that with sex. Like, don't have sex. Don't think about sex. Like it's like the worst thing ever. And then,
Yeah.
but then actually, like when we see the Bible, like the Bible, there's a lot of like PG-13 rated R stuff about sexuality, and there's a lot of lesson that we need to learn from that. And what we actually see in scripture is that sex matters to God, and obviously in creation we see that sex is good. Like he has a plan and intention for it, and dating is a part of that. Like dating is not the whole thing, because I think there's a deeper sense of like who we are, our longing for connection and human relationship. And sex is just a sliver of that. But if we just avoid that, and it becomes like this taboo, mysterious thing. So I would now say
Hmm.
I would totally turn
Yeah.
and change and say like the Bible has a lot to say about dating in like a holistic sense.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So basically, I mean, if you're looking for the verse that says, thou shalt date in this way, you're not going to find that verse. Like the word dating itself, or the concept of dating, is not in the Bible, but there are so many things about relationships, uh, physical intimacy, relational
Mm.
intimacy. Those are the things that are in there, and those things are super relevant to dating, right? So that's what you're saying, basically.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
like a
So,
lot of what
yeah.
Jesus teaches about is like, I mean, just let's just think about the one another's. They're all about just how to treat one another, how to honor one another, and like in a healthy dating relationship, you got to do all those things. Like you can't,
Hmm.
and so yeah, I would say that when we consider the whole core and character of a person, an individual, especially as a follower of Christ,
Hmm.
um, I feel like we're being irresponsible if we feel like the Bible doesn't have much to say about dating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to just touch on one thing that you kind of said in there before we move on to the next question. But like, because, you were kind of talking about how, and the conversation about dating is not just about, sex, right? That's
Mm.
just one aspect of it. But, one thing that you were saying that sort of in the purity culture model of things, yeah, it was sort of like sex is bad, so stay away from it. Stay as far away from it as
Hmm.
possible.
Yeah.
And that's why you shouldn't even date, because if you date, there's the danger that you might have premarital sex. And so,
Yeah.
the worst thing you could do is have sex. And so
Oh
therefore
yeah.
stay away from that, which means stay away from dating. But, I think what you mentioned is important, because I think what a lot of people have found coming out of that culture is that when you spend all this time basically drilling it into a person's mind that this thing is bad, that it's hard to flip that switch then when you do get married,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
trying to then enjoy physical intimacy with your partner, but you've had it pounded into your head that this thing is bad, it's shameful, it's dirty.
Mm.
And then for a lot of people, I think that what they have found is that it's hard to then flip the switch on basically,
Yeah.
and have it suddenly be good and enjoy it without,
Yeah.
that residual sense of guilt.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. Because like we've made it, especially the idea of sex, like we made it so much about shame, so much of it about guilt. When like it's a good thing. Like it's like I would dare even say like it's a part of our imago Dei. like we see it in Genesis.
Hmm.
And so yeah, the fact that we've shunned it so much, and or even like maybe if I could even go as far as say, if there's someone that have fallen in that area, and if
Hmm.
someone feels like they have to carry that guilt with them, like actually I just had this conversation with somebody like this week. This person, he's been married for about 4 or 5 years now, and he was telling me about how much guilt he feels about his previous relationship because he had fallen into sexual sin. And but if you're truly there's no more condemnation in Christ, right? But like, because like throughout his whole life he was taught that premarital sex is so bad, so evil, like it almost became like this curse, like even in his like marriage now, that he has a hard time shaking it off. And so like we,
Yeah.
in our attempt to like well intended, or in our well intended intent to protect
Hmm.
our youth, and what we've done is really we just created all this fear, stigma, guilt, shame with it. And now there's a lot of kind of, we needed some catch up. And luckily I believe that the grace of Christ pierces through that, um,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's going to take a lot of time to just kind of like really be able to receive that grace from God, because we are free, like we are free indeed, and we should be
Hmm.
able to free that, and so that we could experience what the type of sex that God created us to experience. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's this whole interview is not about trashing I Kiss Dating Goodbye and
Yeah. No.
purity
Yeah.
culture. So we will
Well,
talk
the
about other things.
yeah, but the
But
author did
yeah,
trash it himself, so like in that sense,
yeah.
like we're a little bit validated.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it is important to say, because I think that was actually one of the aspects of kind of that purity culture movement, which
Mm,
was that if you engage in any kind of premarital sex, it's like your physical intimacy is this gift that you're supposed to give to your future spouse. And anytime you engage in any kind of physical intimacy outside of marriage, it's like that gift has been damaged or marred, and
mm,
that basically
mm,
can never be repaired, right? Like,
mm,
you
mm,
can never undo this damage that you're doing to this gift that you're supposed to
mm.
give to your future partner. That was kind of the idea, right? that
Yeah, yeah,
that you're bringing all of these other experiences, all these other partners, and all this other baggage into your relationship. Which, I mean, there is some truth to the aspect that, I mean,
yeah.
obviously it's going to have an impact on you,
Hmm.
these experiences that you
Absolutely.
have. But yeah, there was this idea conveyed where it's like you're doing, you're like damaged goods, right? And there's
Yeah,
nothing that you can do to ever repair that. And yeah, that's not very, like you said, that's not very gospel. That's
yeah,
not very grace, where we can be redeemed and we can be forgiven. So
yeah.
I'm glad that you
Absolutely.
you mentioned that. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I don't know if I Kiss Dating Goodbye will come up again in this interview, but I feel like we addressed it pretty well.
yeah.
So here's the next question I wanted to ask you. So like we said, it's been like 12 plus years since either you or I have been in the dating scene. And, there's probably a lot of things that are different now, especially with like technology and just how much the world has changed. I mean, don't even get started on COVID and what that means for
Yeah,
dating and
yeah.
relationships. But I just wanted to kind of ask you, like, just based on what you've observed, and, I'm sure you still counsel people who are singles and who are dating, like,
Mm.
what do you think has changed about dating nowadays? And then what do you think has still remained the same and maybe always remains the same? So maybe you could tackle the first part. Like, what do you think about dating has changed nowadays?
Yeah. Man, it's a different world out there. Like um, yeah, it's a totally different landscape. Like it's hard to have those kind of chance encounters. I recently read something. I don't know why I read a lot of stuff on dating and relationships and stuff, but just maybe just comes up. But like I read that in South Korea, because they're having such a hard time, or people have like this like the dating app, online dating stuff fatigue, and so people
Hmm.
are intentionally going to like they would spend a lot of time in cafes hoping for the like chance of a chance encounter, um, and because they're just kind of fatigue out there of of being
Hmm.
online. But that'll be the first big change that I could think of, since you and I were in the dating scene, dating world, dating game, however you want to say it. Um, yeah, the online dating has become a norm. I think when like 15 years ago, when I was like, that was not even like we still had Friendster, you know, so um, totally dating ourselves again.
Mhm.
But dating apps were, I think, just starting. I had just known one couple. Or in college, I just knew one couple that started dating and eventually got married through online dating. But
Mhm.
I feel like now it's such a norm. It's a huge factor. It's a huge part of almost everyone is engaging and connecting with one another on online dating. And I feel like
Mhm.
with that there comes like specific anxieties and fatigues, like stressors from that. That's different from just meeting people by chance. And you mentioned COVID. I think COVID definitely will play a huge factor. Again, I read
Mhm.
another article just a couple weeks ago that they're saying that the "I'm vaccinated" is now like the official pickup line. You know, so like they could actually go and hang out and go to the park together.
Yeah.
But I feel like on a deeper level, I feel like that there might be lingering fears and anxieties when it comes to dating now, like post COVID. I feel like there will be heavy kind of filtering and scanning through everything that's related to COVID, whether it's how you feel about vaccines or how you feel about certain political issues that came up in this last year.
Mhm.
Before, like you would check Christian in a dating app, and then you could kind of assume like, oh, Christians will be like this kind of type of range of people, and now that's not so much
Mhm.
the case, right? Like you're gonna click Christian, and you're gonna be like, ooh, you could be this type of Christian that leans this way, and or this type of Christian that leans this way, and we're gonna see a lot more of that.
Yeah, that's it's funny though that you talk about online dating because yeah, I mean, online dating was around. It was starting to be around more when we were, in the
Mm-hmm.
dating scene, but it was still kind of like, yeah, there was a little bit of that stigma to it
Yeah.
where, if you met somebody online, you didn't really want to tell other people how you met. Like, oh, people would ask you like, hey, how did you guys meet? And
Yeah.
there would always be that slight hesitation, like, well, met
Yeah.
online, right? Like
Yeah.
so there was definitely that stigma, whereas now it's just like a totally normal, way of meeting people and completely accepted. So definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something else that I noticed, kind of on the flip side, maybe this is more on dating couples who are already dating, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like for a lot of dating couples during COVID in particular, it might have actually sort of accelerated things for them. And like this kind
Mm-hmm.
of situations I'm thinking of is like, especially during like quarantine and stuff like that, I think it was really hard for people who were single, like people who were single and who were living on their own
Yeah.
during like lockdowns and things like that, and just being alone so much.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
and I know several couples who this was true for, and I imagine that there are a lot of other couples as well that during COVID and during the lockdowns, just to cope with the loneliness, right? That a lot
Yeah.
of them ended up, kind of like moving in together and things like that, just because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's too, like, if you're single and you're not living with roommates or family, like just being isolated like that is really hard. And so I think a lot of couples, and
Mm.
probably even a lot of Christian couples, maybe, during COVID decided to like start living together just for loneliness sake and just kind of
Yeah.
maintaining their sanity, right? And so,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to judge that because I can't imagine how hard it would be to just be isolated
Mm-hmm.
by yourself for a year
Yeah.
plus. So it's hard for me to judge that, but just kind of wondering what will come out of that in terms of like a lot of these relationships that sort of got sort of pushed forward maybe quicker than they might have in a normal circumstance. And then number
Yeah.
two, I imagine there's probably a lot of couples who kind of maybe accelerated in their minds like, dude, what are we waiting for? Let's just get married, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know that. I don't have any facts or figures behind that, but I
Yeah.
imagine that might be the case.
Yeah, I know a couple couples that or a couple couples. Yeah, that got married during that time because they just felt like, okay, it's hard. Life is hard. So let's just
Hmm.
make the most out of it. We know we love each other, so let's do it. But I do want to
Hmm.
highlight a positive change, which is
Hmm.
especially like in church culture or specific to church culture. I feel like singleness is being recognized more. Like we're not quite where I feel like we where it needs to
Hmm.
be, like where it's like really celebrated as much as it should, like how the Apostle Paul was, and that
Hmm.
that. And but I do feel like we made positive steps forward in terms of how the church views singleness. I feel like growing up in the church context that I was a part of, like singleness was viewed as like some kind of defect, or something like
Mm,
that, or like it was everyone's trying to hook them up. So like I feel like that they felt that pressure. They probably still feel a little bit of that now too. And I feel like a lot of that singleness was also kind of way of like I've heard this from so many older people that I love and admire and respect, but I would hear them say something like, "Oh, they're single, so they have the time and they have the energy to do youth group,
mm,
to do children's ministry and to do all this stuff." And so the singles became like the workhorses of the church, and a lot of men that are being burned out, and things like that. But like, I feel
yeah.
like that's not so much. I feel like I haven't heard that as much, and I feel like
Hmm.
churches are trying to to recognize that more and celebrate it more.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I would say that's probably a positive change.
What about some things that you feel like have not changed and have pretty much remained the same?
Yeah, like the humanness of dating will always be the same, right? Um, we love that has forever been a part of our human narrative.
Hmm.
um, yeah, even I still go back and I could watch uh, The Wedding Singer and like still like feel all the same feelings that I felt when I first watched Wedding Singer. Yeah, because of that. And I feel like there are always going to be people that are searching and longing for that kind of connection. Because I feel like I think that's a part of our Imago Dei, right? Like God, we worship and we are created in the image of a God who is in nature relational, right? That's part of the triune nature that's mysterious yet so concrete in our faith. And I think that's the same way about our humanness, that we are created for relationship. We have this longing for a relationship. It's mysterious, but yet it's so at the root of who we are. I think that's gonna be a part of it. But also, I think now to flip it on the negative side, I feel like because of it, I think there will always be a side of it that people are just kind of desperate for it and be overzealous for it. The sin side of it, like we could potentially idolize the idea of romance and dating and all that stuff. But so the basic humanness, I feel like those will always be the same, and they'll never go away. Well, we are always gonna have um, romance very much a part of our Imago Dei.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, there's just something about relationships and that desire for romance, but also
Mm-hmm.
that desire for family,
Mm-hmm.
for even having children and things like that. It's just innate in us, something that God created into us in a way in which we represent His image. That's basically what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That
Okay.
longing in itself is us tapping into our Imago Dei. Yeah.
So a little bit more, personal question here for you.
Okay.
But
Yeah. These two
kind
are
of look.
warm ups, right? So.
Yeah, those were the softballs. These are the
Yeah.
real questions that the people are here for.
Yeah.
But just kind of like looking back, what are some things that you feel like maybe you got wrong in dating? And just so
Yeah.
you just to be able to redeem yourself, I will also ask you,
Okay.
to also share like what are some things in dating you feel like you got right. So
Ah.
maybe we can just learn a little bit from your experience. But yeah, what are some things that you feel like you got wrong, and what are some things that you feel like you got right in dating?
Oh man. Yeah. How long is this podcast, Jay? How long? Yeah. So one of my insecurities in deciding to do your podcast and on this topic is I've messed up so much. I feel like I've messed up so much in this realm of dating. Like
Uh-huh.
I've had many girlfriends. And every single one of them broke up with me. You know, so clearly I'm doing something wrong,
Hey,
or at
it
least
only
I
has to work with one person, right? It only has to work with one person.
yeah. So so it was a lot of my insecurity. Like it came
Mm,
from dating and it and it has taken years of just me being in my relationship with Ray Ann and my relationship with Jesus and discerning processing with the Holy Spirit that I feel like I'm at much better awareness about this. But yeah, and so I definitely do see a lot of redemption for sure. But first thing that comes to mind about what I've done wrong is I think ever since sixth grade I always had a girlfriend or at least pursuing somebody. And to be honest, I thought I was going to marry every single one of them. I
Mm.
thought, oh, this is great. Sixth grade, elementary school sweethearts. Like I don't know if there's such a thing, but I believed it. I really believed it. Um, I could go back to like third grade when I think that's when I first like, oh, I think I like this person. I'll probably marry this person. And I remember having those thoughts. And so it was a lot of it was very innocent. But to be honest, it was a lot of arrogance too. I think just gradually what had started off as something totally cute and innocent became such a part of my identity. The fact that I was dating somebody became such a part of my identity, and anything that becomes an identity, part of my identity that is not of Christ, eventually becomes an idol.
Mm.
And I really, so by the time I got to maybe like senior going into college for sure, I idolized the idea of being with somebody. Like I pursued it. I mean, I guess I could even say aggressively. Um,
Mm.
and so I guess we are going back to I kiss dating goodbye, but because I thought just as long as I don't fall into sexual sin, and just because I wasn't hurting anybody, I thought everything else was fair game. But I realized that that wasn't the case. There are things that I was doing, um, like that really hurt people, hurt the people that are dating in the past because I was so enamored with the idea that I have to be with somebody.
Mhm.
And yeah, and so again, like going back to the biblical principles of how we treat one another, how we honor one another, how we choose to see each other as the created image bearers of God, and treating them as such. I wasn't doing that. I just, because it was an idol, I wanted them. I worshipped them because I wanted something back from them, and expecting
Mhm.
something back, which is a sense of identity and longing and
Mhm.
purpose and all that stuff.
I see. So
So
you felt like in those
yeah,
relationships, a lot of times it was like you were using them to get a sense of worth for yourself.
yeah, and that's something I didn't come to realize much later. Because at the time I was like, I just want to be with somebody, and it was
Mhm.
just longing. Like I like this person. Oh, she's cute, and but I didn't realize the deeper kind of my sinful nature kind of like working itself out, because I still think the longing to be with somebody, I still very much believe that that's part of our like image bearerness, to long for love. That is of God. But what drives that, and what puts the parts that puts us into overdrive and try to keep that love, um, I, I think that's where some of that sinful nature stuff came out. Um, and so I hurt people. I've been hurt by people because of that. Yeah, so it was very kind of like very deep human core stuff that I wasn't able to see because it was so important that I was with somebody, and or at least I was pursuing after somebody. And it wasn't until probably my somewhere between my second and third year in college, I was coming out of a relationship where I thought I was going to marry this person, and things unraveled pretty quickly, at least in my mind, and I was completely disillusioned and disheveled and just kind of like, what do I do? And so I took that summer to I was I was visiting my family in Atlanta. So that whole summer I was in Atlanta, and in that season of just kind of being away from the physical spaces where I was dating this person, and it allowed me to kind of remove myself emotionally, even spiritually. I think that was the first time I realized I always pursued someone, and I always wanted to be with someone, and I didn't realize how much that blinded my longing or my need for a deeper connection with Jesus.
Hmm.
I thought everything was good because I was a youth leader. I was serving in my college ministry, and so I thought like between me and God was good. But I didn't realize how much God was really longing after me that whole time. And and I feel like that's when things started changing for me. Yeah, because as desperate as I was to be with somebody, um, just that realization that Jesus was even more desperate, but he was patient with me. He waited for me. I realized it was time for me to respond back and allow these areas of hurt to be really spoken into by really him. And so the next time I got into a relationship that was pretty serious, I started really feeling feelings for somebody that I felt like this could be potentially serious. I tried to do everything else to like sabotage this person or any kind of like yeah, because everything that I felt like everything that I did innately was to try to woo this person. Like this is part of my arrogance, Jay. Like I thought I was
Hmm.
like such a Casanova man. I thought like I could just like if we just go to this place together, like it's over. Like oh Lord, like I cringe when I say that. Oh man, um, but I it was I didn't realize it was such an innate part of me that I had to force myself to step away, at least in this season, because I knew that the idea of dating was had become such an idol at this point in my life.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, honestly, I feel like that is, of all the things that you could have said about things that you did wrong, I mean, really, maybe that is the core thing that anybody ever does
Mm-hmm.
wrong
Yeah,
in dating and relationships, right? Is just turning something that is potentially good and turning something that is potentially something that Jesus would even want for us, but
yeah,
turning it into an idol, right?
yeah,
Pursuing it more than we pursue God, or trying to find, our worth or satisfaction in that thing more than in Christ, and then it becomes an idol. And so, yeah, I'm really glad that you framed your experience in that way, because I mean, at the end of the day, that's the potential mistake that any of us
mm,
would make, really, in
yeah,
anything. So then what about,
uh-huh.
what are some things maybe you feel like you got right that maybe
Yeah,
some of our listeners can emulate?
yeah. One simple thing that I didn't and this is probably and I'm so thankful for growing up in the church and and I think one of the things that I was taught early on, and not just with dating, but just to hold things loosely. And
Mm,
so I remember sometime in high school, I don't know when it was exactly, but sometime in high school, whenever I started dating somebody, I would pray, God, if I ever, and it was like almost automatic. And I remember almost like distinct moments when I would pray this for each person that I started dating. But I would say that God, if there's ever a moment when I start loving this person more than I I love you, because I won't know it, take her away. Um, and it and then the breakup happens, and I'll be like, why did I pray that? But that was God being faithful to be like, hey, you prayed for this, and because I love you, I'm gonna answer it. And so I every time I prayed, like God, if I ever start loving this person, if this person ever gets in the way of me loving you, take take this person away. And that was something little, but I feel like, man, because I was in so many different relationships, it became automatic.
yeah,
um, yeah, and I'm glad it was that. It really,
yes.
at least at the start, my intention was to hold it loosely, and
Hmm.
somewhere along the line, I lost track of that. And it was always kind of readjusting, and of course, there's always grace in that too, and knowing that God is still like, yeah, you screwed up, but you're still doesn't change of the fact that I'm your beloved, and I always had to kind of go back to that, but that's definitely one thing I
Hmm.
prayed each time.
I mean, which is kind of a way to humble yourself, right?
Mm,
To humble yourself and say, you know what, I don't always know what is the best
mm,
for
yeah,
me, and
yeah,
and ultimately just to kind of allow Jesus to lead you in, whoever your potential person is to, marry one day. And so, yeah, I see it as being a form of submission
Mm.
and a
Yeah.
form of humility. So, yeah, I definitely think that would be
Mm.
something, something good that, our listeners, anybody who is a single or in a dating relationship, that they could kind of take on that same posture as well. I like the way they're saying that, to hold with loose hands. We make our plans, we do the best that we can to kind of discern what Jesus would have for us. But, at the end of the day, we don't see the full landscape like he does. And so
Yeah.
sometimes we do have to kind of hold things with loose hands and say, but, Jesus, if you see it better than I do, if you can see the field better than I do, then I'm going to trust you with that.
Yeah.
So I think that's great
Absolutely.
advice. All right. One more question here.
Mm.
So, obviously, as a pastor, you do premarital counseling for couples, who are, usually it's for couples who have gotten engaged, so they're going to get married. And so then they would probably come to you and you would do some sort of premarital counseling for them. And so, there's like different topics that you talk about usually in premarital counseling, right? You talk about
Yeah.
finances, you talk about family planning, sex, roles and responsibilities, and things like that, right? And so
Yeah.
the question that I had for you is, of those topics that you usually kind of don't talk about until, you get engaged and you're doing the premarital counseling, what are some things that you wish dating couples would maybe talk about or learn about even before, they get to that engaged step, right? Like, hey, these would be things like you guys should hopefully talk about this stuff even long before you get to the engagement stage. Like, what are some things that you wish that they would kind of learn about or talk about before they got there?
That's a great question. I think one of the important things is to be on the same page spiritually. When Raina and I first started dating, someone advises like when you start dating somebody, make sure you see God the same way. That your approach to God is like at least similar, or you could at least empathize or understand how your partner engages with God and how this person thrives in their relationship with God. And that was so helpful for Rayanne and I. And luckily for us, like worship was one of those things where we felt like we could really connect with God in that space spiritually. And so whenever we did worship together, we felt like we connected it in unspoken ways that were like we can't describe it, but we feel like we feel known and we feel seen first by God, but with one another, and that there's something like almost miraculous and like mysterious and beautiful, yet at the same time like deep about that kind of space of like knowing that there's the way you connect to the divine, the way you connect to your Creator, is something that you could share together. I think that's something really beautiful. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one thing I like, maybe a way I like to describe it is like it's like music. Like you have to learn to get in the same key, at least know each other's key, and yet to know that there are gonna be moments where some seasons where like you're playing it fast, and sometimes you're gonna be playing it slow. There can be moments where there's gonna be a simple melody or a complex melody, and so that when those dissonant notes come up, you know how to adjust. And I think the first and foremost thing is just know where you are spiritually. I feel like there's a missional aspect to marriage. I don't want to poo poo on the church, uh, but marriage in the church, right? There's statistics out there like marriage in the church and marriage statistics outside of the church is like no different, right? And I feel like there's an aspect of marriage that we really need to reclaim in the church, and we need to allow it to be something that we celebrate and we honor. But yet, at the same time, again, like not idealized because we don't want it to be like this is the only way to live life. It's not. It's one of the ways, and it's a good way. But we need to reclaim it as a way of like this is what godly relationship looks like. This is what God has in store for us. This is what the relationship between God and His Son and the Holy Spirit is like, and we need to like live that out in a way that's like good. I think when
Mm-hmm.
Ran and I dated, one of the things that we were very clear about is we started dating on my last year in college, and I knew pretty early on in that time, like in my last year of college, that I was going to be moving to another state, to Georgia. So one of the first conversations that we had was, "Hey, I like you. I'm pretty sure you like me, but I just want to let you
Hmm.
know that after I graduate, we're going to be doing this long distance. Is that okay
Mm.
with you? You know? And so let them know on your future plans. Don't let it creep up,
Yeah.
you know, and have be a part of that because I think that's later on in marriage. You're doing that all the time. You're
Hmm.
done in real time, and so get into the practice of that stuff and set your expectations right away about or and this is one thing that Rain and I had to adjust is we had to adjust our expectations of once we became long distance because we didn't understand we didn't realize how difficult the time change would be because
Mm.
when she'll get out of her work and like around midnight in California time Pacific time in Atlanta time that's 3 a.m. you know so
Yeah.
like it was so difficult to connect and it became a source of frustration for us because we know we want to connect and it's a genuine longing for us, but it was so difficult to do that. So we had to find ways around that and creative, and that only happened because of we had to like realize these are the expectations, and so we had to adjust accordingly. It's super important that be clear about your expectations and work together on it. Because I mean, this is like so cliche, but you know, communication is
Hmm.
super important, and dating when you're dating, it's you're practicing for the type of communication that you have in marriage. And so actually part of that too, one practical thing that would be helpful actually for any person, not just like people who are dating, but learning good conflict management skills.
Mm.
A few years ago before COVID, Rand and I went to a marriage class on it was called Couples Talk. And it was all about just how do you have conversations when you're upset at one another and it was so helpful for us and its principles and practical things of how we talk to each other when we're really mad at each other and to be honest like I still use those today like I use it when even when Rand doesn't know that I'm using it because it's a helpful way for like for us to like because so much about conflict management is not so much about communicating what you want but it's to let you know that you understand and hear the other person right?
Mm.
I mean, that's a real, like, real deep communication is just allowing the other person to know that they're being heard. And so having those skill sets, it'll be so important in dating, but also it has huge implications elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just so many important thoughts that you shared there. The first one, yeah, just what you said about being spiritually in the same key. I thought that was a really good analogy, right? That, because sometimes I think we just say, like, well, just make sure the other person is a Christian too. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, we could have I mean, we could probably do a whole nother interview just on that question alone about,
Mm,
dating between believers and people who are not believers. Maybe we'll save that conversation for another time.
yeah.
But, I think sometimes we just kind of, well, is the other person a Christian? Yes. Okay, good. You're good. Right. But I like the way that you're putting that maybe we can look deeper than that, right? Because, kind of like what you had said earlier, right? I mean, it's so easy for somebody to check a box and say, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian. You're a Christian? Cool. Like, we're both
Mm,
Christians, but
mm-mm.
we could mean completely different things by that,
Yeah.
right? And so, really, it's more about like, what does this person's relationship with Jesus look like?
Yeah.
And what does my relationship with Jesus look like? And to make sure that yeah, I like the way that you said that we view God in the same way and we relate to God in the same way or similar ways, and we can understand the way in which each other relates with God, that would be an important component to having a successful relationship, successful marriage. Not just you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, good,
Yeah.
right? But like, do we really understand each other and understand the ways in which we worship and connect with
Yeah.
God? And that is something that would be important for the health of the relationship. So,
Yeah. And actually, can I share like one? So maybe a practical way of how that looks like in our marriage is like Rayanna's an Enneagram 9, and a part of that is she enjoys quality time, and so one of the practices that we have as a couple and for us as spiritual people, we have a yearly retreat, personal retreat, where no kids, no spouse, it's just person and Jesus, and
mm,
and that could be an overnighter, 2 nights somewhere, or something like that. Because we understand that's how we connect with God. That's important to us. And it's not a jealous thing. Like, I don't, it's not like, oh man, I have to be with the kids this weekend, while she's like off, spending time with Jesus. It's like, no, like because I love her and because I understand this is how she connects with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like glad to do that for Rayanne, and she does the same for me. I mean, she's
Mm-hmm.
actually she's on my case, when I'm like, like I'm busy right now, so I'll just do it next week. He's like, no, this is important for you, because she
Yeah.
knows me. She knows like I could out hustle my way out of like, of things, and then she'll say, no, you got to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one of the ways we've learned to love one another and care for one another. And this is something we started when we were like dating.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you create space in your relationship with each other for the other person to have time and maintain that relationship with Jesus, even apart from you.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really cool. That's awesome. Actually, I think that's really good advice. Oh man, I mean, this topic is just we could talk about this for probably another hour, another 2 hours. But
Yeah, we
man,
love
Elliot,
love,
thank you.
man.
Yeah, we do. We love love. But Elliot, thank you so much for just taking time to share your wisdom and your experience with us, and just kind of your pastoral perspective on this. Thanks also for just being kind of vulnerable with us and sharing with us some of the ways in which maybe you got dating wrong. But yeah, I think you've shared just so many important nuggets of truth and wisdom that I think our listeners can grab onto. And so yeah, just really appreciate you taking time to bring that truth. And guys, I really encourage you to. I'll share in the episode description links to the One Life City Church. Encourage you, if you're looking to connect, you're looking for somebody to maybe talk to and go deeper on it. Encourage you to connect with the church, connect with Pastor Elliot, and anybody who knows Elliot and Rand. They are just like couples goals all day every day. And so they're the real deal, man. This is not just talk, but
It's
they
too
they
kind, man.
they are the real deal. And so if you're looking to connect on a deeper level with somebody who can maybe give you some advice or counsel, you have more questions about dating that you would like to ask, I'm going to include those links. I encourage you to reach out, or you can of course reach out to myself. But Elliot, again, thank you so much for taking time to be on the podcast.
Thanks, Jay. It's been a real honor and joy, man.
All right, so there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed my interview with Pastor Elliot Chung. I think there was a lot of good and practical wisdom there for you on dating and relationships. I hope it's something that you find helpful. And if you would like to connect more with Pastor Elliot, I'll include a link to One Life City Church in the episode description. And as always, if you have any feedback or questions, you can leave me a message on my pod inbox. You'll find a link in the episode description. And if you haven't already, if you enjoyed the episode, could you give us a follow and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts? This will just help other people find us as well. And also, if you would like to support the podcast, you can find a link in the episode description to buy me a cup of coffee, and that will help support this work as well. And so with that being said, we'll see you on the next episode. For more Daily Sabbath content, please be sure to follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on our Instagram account, Daily Sabbath.